Yeah, especially since we are the ocean planet. We're the plankton planet. And if you look
Yeah,
at us from
we are.
Mars, that's where we just don't see it because we can't see below the
Yeah.
surface like you can see a tree. Like I'm here in the heart of the Amazon, and I love the Amazon. I would die for the Amazon, and it's great. But there are 20 Amazons underwater, and we lose an entire Amazon every 5 years from the drought of dustfall.
Well, hello and welcome to another edition of the Climate Emergency Forum. I'm Herb Simmons. I'm the author of A Climate Vocabulary of the Future, and I'm host of a program. This is one of over 200 programs focusing on all aspects of the climate emergency. We're recording this today, November 10th, 2025, where the starting gun has just fired on COP30 right in Belém, Brazil. And for the next 2 weeks, tens of thousands of people, I guess we won't know how many until they do the official count, presidents and school strikers, indigenous leaders, scientists, and yes, more fossil fuel lobbyists than ever before, in all likelihood, will argue, they'll negotiate, and maybe, if we're lucky and determined, we'll move the needle on a crisis that is no longer creeping up on us. It is sprinting, and it's right here. As always, we have with us our regular panelist, Paul Beckwith. Hello, Paul. Paul lives in Ottawa and is a climate system scientist and has a YouTube channel with over 1,600 videos on all aspects of the climate crisis. And our special guest today, I'll say that 3 times, is in Belém, and that's Alex Carlin. And you are no stranger to the Climate Emergency Forum. You've appeared with us from COPs and other places before, and so we welcome you back. We're so thrilled to have you here or there in Belém. Alex was an American musician and songwriter, grew up in California, and you once, as I understand it, played the world's longest solo concert, 32 or so hours, still in the Guinness Book of World Records. And it's a world record because I think it's the first time I've ever spoken to somebody who's in the Guinness Book of World Records. So I'm extra excited about that. You've been on concert halls and stages all over Europe and Africa and America and pretty much all over the world for decades. But in addition to that, or as part of that, I guess it should say, you've been passionate about climate for quite a few years now. You've been a climate correspondent for the Center for Media and Democracy longer than probably most of us have been recycling. And as I understand it, Alex, this is your 12th straight COP, and you should get an award for that. Maybe that should put you into another page of the Guinness Book of World Records. We'll see there. That's probably more COPs than most countries have sent delegates. And I first met you briefly last year in Baku when I moderated a panel on solar radiation management, and you were in the audience. You and the questions and answered made a spirited defense of solar radiation management. We're thrilled to have you back on the opening day in the Amazon. So welcome to the Climate Emergency Forum. And my first very simple question is, give us a bit of the atmospherics and your arrival here. What are your initial impressions? How is it compared to some of the other COPs you've seen? What are your expectations for the time that you're going to be here?
Okay, great. Well, I'll tell you what, it's quite something here. I was lucky enough to fly directly into Rio for 3 days of swimming in the extreme sport waves at the Copacabana beach to get in physical shape for this incredible event here. See, but you have to understand my perspective is really very focused on what I would call the ground level, bottom up aspect. I mean, really, I can tell you why pretty briefly. I pretty much almost just essentially ignore what's going on the higher levels of, as you mentioned, well, there's the fossil fuel companies and there's the elites of the government and all those elements that are sitting there negotiating these things that are it's based they're based on false premises from my point of view. They're essentially arguing about things that don't really apply to the question, to this problem and the solution. So I can go into that. But honestly, I've been getting a taste of what I'm interested in for all these years, which is networking and meeting amazing people from all over the planet, that this is the only event where you'll find this kind of concentration and mix of brilliant people from the ground level. I mean, people who are just doing things on the street level of each of these countries, mostly in the South, global South, that I'm interested in, that teach me so much and have brought me to a level where now I know too much to not come. I have so much knowledge about the actual solutions that matter and will actually make a difference to a 10-year-old in Africa for like, what's his life going to be like when he's 20 or 30? What I'm learning and what I'm involved with my interviews is really important for that. But I would say that, most of what's going on that you might read in the major media and what's going on at the higher levels doesn't really impact that. They're just sort of arguing amongst themselves and what's about things that have importance, but not really for what I could describe. Let's put it this way. I've boiled it down just to make it easier to understand that, we're looking at in the global South, certainly too hot, very soon, too hot to work outside, too hot for farms to produce proper food. Even more urgent, which is not about temperature, but about CO2, is the acidification of the ocean. Very soon, 5, 10 years, could be so acidic that the fish eggs won't open, that, it would just be impossible for fish to survive at all. And these are real problems that need real solutions. So what do you find in the, general public about solutions? You'll hear the mantra of emissions reduction. Just get rid of those cars and factories fast enough and we'll be fine, right? Well, if you had a magic wand and had no cars and oil companies, guess what? That 2 trillion, trillions of tons of CO2 that humans have put in the air since we've started doing that, that's so much that if you just had no cars tomorrow morning and no factories tomorrow morning, that amount would still cause the problems I just mentioned. And it takes hundreds of years for that to go away by itself. So it doesn't really solve anything to focus on emissions reduction as the one and only mantra. So I'm constantly aware of that. That's the framework of a lot of these discussions at these COPs, but that's not why I'm here. Once again, I'm here to get below that from the bottom up. There's a lot of great ideas and a lot of great solutions.
But let me introduce Paul again. Paul, good to see you. And I would urge everyone who's watching this to take a look. I'm sure we'll have a link to your conversation, Paul, with Alex last year in Baku, which was particularly delightful and engaging. And so, Paul, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, I want to apologize to Alex first because I should be sitting on the chair right next to him there. Remind me of this if I have any doubts of attending the next one next year. But anyway, I'd love to hear some of your horror stories of accommodation. Like I said, I joked with everybody earlier on a text. Are you living in a tent in the rainforest? Is that where you're staying? Because accommodation, logistics has
Yeah.
been a big issue for Brazil. I'd like to point out, remind people that the government actually raised a section of rainforest to join two parts of Belém by a 6-lane highway. They did that specifically for the COP and then the cruise ships in the harbor and people charging $1,000 a night for accommodation. So there's been a lot of things like that. Do you know how many countries have actually shown up?
No, I don't have that, but I did see those 2 cruise ships yesterday. My friend took me out for a swim a little bit north of Belém, and there they were, the biggest cruise ships I've ever seen in my life. And
Hmm.
I solved the mystery or the challenge of housing, ironically enough, through couchsurfing.com, which really, in principle, no money changes hands at all.
Hmm.
But what I found was someone offering very reasonable accommodation, just, 25
Yeah.
bucks a night, like in a perfect, beautiful, clean place, nice people, just all perfect. So I
Yeah.
solved
So
it
there's
through my good karma, I guess. But
Yeah, no,
it's
that's great. I've just been reading a paper about the Southern Oceans and the carbon sink. I mean, we rely on the Southern Oceans to absorb, almost half of the CO2, anthropogenic CO2 that we put in. But, You know, with the warming and stratification, changes in the southern annular mode winds and things, we're finding out it doesn't absorb as much.
Yeah.
There's actually outgassing in some regions. So I know that what you're going to talk about is the oceans, right? I mean,
Well,
the plankton are so vital, and it turns out that the plankton, the chlorophyll A, can be detected from satellites in space. They've got some laser radar techniques to detect it even when it's completely dark in the southern hemisphere. There's not many ships that want to ply in the southern hemisphere oceans because it's just too stormy and, too crazy. So we don't have a lot of data from down there, but maybe you can tell us more about plankton if that's what you
yeah.
were going
Well,
to talk
well,
about.
yeah, but I want to frame it in terms of what do we have control over? What can we do? In the time frame that I described a minute ago, we're in this kind of urgency thing where we really have to focus in on how can we make a difference? Where are the areas that we could actually make it so 10, 20 years from now, we're not living in a miserable nightmare. This is why I talk about plankton, because I became aware of this in 2017 when I did a 4-hour interview with Russ George, who to me is let's say the Galileo, where the Copernicus was John Martin, who discovered this truth about plankton, where plankton blooms were over millions of years, always the precursors of ice ages. So that's how much CO2 they repurpose. But also, what Russ has been developing is how much they actually manage the acidification problem. Because when you have H2O in the water and CO2 combines with H2O to create carbonic acid, but if the plankton are restored to their natural, normal, historical levels of health and abundance, that doesn't happen. That's an actual management of the problem. And we've developed this solution called 100 villages, where we don't have to rely and wait on oligarchs like Elon Musk or anybody. We can just have these fishing villages around the world go out and replenish their fish, by the way. But by doing that, by replenishing the base of the food chain, which is plankton, that also repurposes enough CO2 to give us a chance to not overheat, not only from the repurposed CO2, but also because they create white clouds. It's incredible how much white clouds are generated by plankton blooms and how much albedo that creates, how much reflecting of the heat. So you get the heat thing and this acidification problem. There's nothing else I've heard of, and I'm open to anybody who could tell me otherwise, a management of the acidification problem via plankton restoration, which happens very quickly. And that acidification not only doesn't happen, but it actually breaks apart the actual carbonic acid. So it's really lucky. We have one last chance, in my estimation, of how to manage the heat and the acidification. And that's bringing back the plankton, which is absolutely doable. And I just today was starting on my journalism here of interviewing an incredible person from the Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, French West Africa, who is in the process, and you can read about it. You can have a link, of course, to my dispatches. He'll be my first interview tomorrow morning. And in a couple of days, it'll be published. And everybody can read about what's actually happening. This is not a dream. This is not just me talking about it. It's actually reality of Africa is going to be the leader. See, Africa will be the leader because we can't wait for America or Europe. Africa, because they're facing the urgency and they are understanding of this nature restoration, right? That's our only chance. It's the only thing with the capacity to deal with it. With
Can you
what we're
stand up a
facing.
bit so we can see the rest of your shirt a bit? We just
Well,
see
there's
the
not much,
top. Okay, there
more.
you go. Perfect. Wonderful.
Yeah, I've got a whole band. I've been the premier reggae band in Africa. As we created a band called Africa Climate Band, and we've already played in Togo, Benin, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire, where we do press conferences and we talk about the solution. And we're going to film a song. If everybody remembers, "We Are the World, We Are the Children," we have this "Africa will be the leader," and we're going to have African singers, stars, singing it, and we're going to film it and make a popular video and have it all over Africa, so we can follow it up with a tour of all African countries to generate this mass movement, millions of Africans demanding to bring back the plankton. Of course, it immediately brings back the fish. And because the fish are down 80%, because the plankton's down 80%, right? I mean, it's like when you don't have any base of the food chain, the fish die, and everybody blames it on the Chinese and the Japanese trawlers scooping up the last bits of fish. That's like blaming somebody if there's a drought on land and there's no crops on the farm, and some poor guy is walking around picking up old carrots, right? And blaming him that there's no carrots. To me, that's the
Yeah,
fault. So it's ridiculous, right?
yeah,
So
there's
that's,
tremendous blame. I mean, when people
yeah,
point, remember when you point your finger at somebody, you got three
right.
fingers pointing back at you.
Exactly. So it's the plankton, that's driving all of this. And it's easy to bring it back. The reason why they're down, by the way, is that they, just like a land farm relies on rainfall, plankton relies on dustfall. That's the wind picking up mineral-rich dust from the dry land masses like the Sahara, the Gobi Desert, and it blows it over the ocean, and it falls down as mineral-rich dust. That's how plankton, for millions of years, had a great population and health. And that's how we had a great Earth, right? But now, when you have the CO2 that humans have put in the atmosphere, that made those dry land masses more moist. The grass got wetter, believe it or not, despite all the desertification. It's more a case of greening of those dry land masses. So you have way less mineral dust dropping in the ocean and way less plankton. But it's easy to bring that back. It's parts per trillion. It's like nothing, right? And it's
Yeah.
been done and it's successful. So we just have to get out there and do it like they're going to do in Africa. And by the way, I just full disclosure, I live in Russia for the last 10 years, right? And it is actually, even the Russians understand this really well. And there's some really interesting developments in Russia that they want to be responsible for the planet, and so that is tying into plankton restoration. Next year, we can talk about that, what happened in Russia. But Africa is.
Thank you, Alex, for that. And Russ George, the group that I co-founded, the Healthy Planet Action Coalition, we had him speak at one of our meetings just a couple months ago. So we'll put a link to that. So he's still out there after all these years. My question, and then I'll turn it back to Paul again, is both Paul and I think others are completely supportive of the need for, this sort of third leg of the three-legged bar stool of the climate triad, the cooling part, whether it's putting particles in the sky or particles in the ocean or salt in the clouds. There are a variety of different techniques, but it seems like there still remains this, I wouldn't say uniform opposition, but pretty intense opposition to doing anything that's perceived as a kind of techno fix that messes with nature. And in particular, I read some time ago that there was a declaration by something like 500 African NGOs, who all came out against any of this sort of stuff. How do you work with people and converse with people to begin to have them, sort of see the other side of the story?
Yeah, well, I can say that essentially I maintain an absolutely open mind. I'm looking at the science, looking at the facts. I am not categorically against anything of the sort, and I will look at it, and it's certainly absolutely not going to be sympathetic to somebody's argument that says, well, we don't want to distract from emissions reduction, because I already know that's not a solution, right? So I'm already halfway to, my ears are open and my mind is open. It's just a folly what their argument is not, it doesn't hold much credence for me at all. So that's really in the end, but honestly, I don't really interact so much, at least today, the first day, I haven't talked to anybody about that. But no, it does come up, and I just try to base everything on science and the facts. So, and it's certainly not about distracting from emissions reduction as the one and only mantra that we have to be tunnel vision about and not distract from. I think that's completely selling out and abandoning the problem and the people and the animals and the fish. And it's just a total selling it all out.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Whenever I hear the word distraction in the context of climate change, I wince as well, because I think we all
Yeah.
know, and many of our viewers know, that for many years, many of the climate groups were against doing anything on adaptation because they said it's a distraction from emission reductions. Now you can't talk about removing carbon from the atmosphere because it's a distraction, as if we only have one that as human beings, we only have the ability
Yeah.
to do one thing at the same time, even though there's 8 billion of us. It's a very universal argument and a very frustrating one. Let me turn it back to Paul.
First thing is, I'd be surprised if Africa didn't have some opposition to anything that
Yeah.
Northern Hemisphere colonial countries come up with, right? So that's like a
Right.
knee-jerk reaction based on the history. The second thing I was going to say is getting back to the science. I mean, that's
Yeah.
absolutely, vital. I mean, the idea of not allowing some certain types of research to go on because you don't agree, that's like ridiculous
Right.
absurdities. And the other thing is, I think, what people don't realize is that there's lots of areas of the ocean that are high nutrient but low iron, and iron is a key factor for growth of phytoplankton. It's very important. It's very important for plants, but it's also very important. I mean, it makes up a key component of our blood. Like if you look at the difference between hemoglobin, which carries oxygen in our blood, and chlorophyll, which does the photosynthesis, producing,
Right.
storing the carbon, there's only a difference is the central molecule is iron in hemoglobin versus what, magnesium or something in chlorophyll. So they're so close together. So the vast areas of the ocean can be much more. We're not trying to change the planet per se. We're trying to get the planet back to a state where it was doing a lot more carbon capture, where it was working for people. I mean, we've stressed it so much. It's losing the resiliency. So we're just trying to, this is why when we talk about nature-based solutions, I mean, what
Right.
can be more natural than trying to get more phytoplankton to try to have what we had before in the past?
Yeah, especially since we are the ocean planet. We're the plankton planet. And if you look
Yeah,
at us from
we are.
Mars, that's where we just don't see it because we can't see below the
Yeah.
surface like you can see a tree. Like I'm here in the heart of the Amazon, and I love the Amazon. I would die for the Amazon, and it's great. But there are 20 Amazons underwater, and we lose an entire Amazon every 5 years from the drought of dustfall. So what if we lost the Amazon in 5 years? Totally. We're properly
Yeah.
crying over losing 5 or 10%, but we lose an entire Amazon in 5 years because we're not replacing the dust, which is so easy to do. And it doesn't hurt anybody. Like when you try to defend the Amazon, unfortunately, you bump up against gold miners with guns, and it's
Yeah.
challenging. I'll still try it, but the plankton just love you for feeding them.
I mean, my favorite spots in the COP have always been the exhibits where they have the Arctic Pavilion and
Yeah.
oceanography pavilions, and there's talks day in, day out on those events. Have you had a chance to peruse through
Yeah.
that yet?
Well, I just walked by the Ocean Pavilion and talked to a nice woman there about getting an interview with somebody who's interested in what I want to interview about. So I already did that. I found it. And it's just the first day of 10, 12 days.
Yeah, yeah.
But,
Well, I'm very
but
excited for you and what you're gonna do. I mean, as you
well,
mentioned, the interactions with people, the
yeah,
people that you meet around the world that you can then make
yeah,
friendships
yeah,
with and have lifelong friendships
yeah,
and
yeah,
collaborations and exchange of science, and that's
yeah.
that's the gist of these conferences from what I
That's
see.
that. That's how I met you. Come on, that's how
Yeah,
I met. And so, it's
exactly.
amazing. People complain about cops, but I keep telling them, yeah, but there's this whole other layer that's so worthwhile and so full of value. I arrived here Saturday at 1 a.m. And I have to say, for the 48 hours, Saturday and Sunday, I didn't hardly sleep. I was immersed in the local music scene actually, and found myself in unbelievable situations, including people from the cops. Like, for example, I met a woman from Colombia and she's just singing perfect harmony with me. And she invited me. I'm going to do an event with them at 11 a.m. at the Colombian Pavilion, where they have a fantastic perspective. And so, one thing that was the 2 days before this, we even opened the COP. I was in the city having unbelievable adventures here, just getting in the mood.
I need to remember if I ever get down about climate and the work I'm doing, I just need to have a Zoom with you. And then immediately
Yeah.
my spirits will be lifted and I'll be singing climate ditties and things as well,
Yeah.
right?
But, I just remember it reminds me of the first climate thing I was at was the first COP was 2009 in Denmark, where I had a concert in Christiania. But I was interviewing like Bolivian people who were just working to elect their indigenous president, and successfully did it. And they just told me, the one thing they taught me was, Alex, this is something that we've got to do all the time, every day. It's such a full-time thing. And that's how we did it. So those are the kind of people that you meet here, people who are out there on the streets every day. So they have something to teach people like us.
We should have you come back at the end of the conference and tell us about all the people you've met and all the connections and what that means for ocean iron fertilization and all the rest of your work, because it's so critical. What you're doing is, in addition to bringing all this incredible energy from your persona and from your music, but you've got a potential. One always hesitates to use the word solution, but I will use it here. You have a potential solution that obviously still needs much more testing and research, but it would be, in my view, and I think you would agree, absolutely suicidal for us not to investigate every possible way as urgently as we can. What are the ways we can do this most effectively? What are the side effects? How do we do this? How do we make it happen? And,
I want to emphasize, though, it's definitely safe enough to go and do it, and that's a test in itself. It's pioneering, and we're going to get the data and see where it lies. But it's definitely not a question of, oh, we still have to do little bathtub, swimming pool experiments for years. No way. That's been done for 40 years, and we've tested it. It is safe enough to go out and do it. And there's no question about that. And the other thing is, the term fertilization is kind of a torpedo, like politically charged thing that is a kind of a negative thing for people like in my group. And it's like, we prefer to use, ocean pasture restoration and other terms, because fertilization is really not proper. Actually, fertilizers would be so much more than parts per trillion, when you talk about when they fertilize something, so it's not fertilizing. Makes people think of Monsanto and, Roundup and all this, toxic stuff. It's not like that at all. So just to caution you on the terminology, fertilization is not the best word.
I appreciate that, and particularly since I wrote a book about climate vocabulary, so I should know better. But anyway, we are so happy to have you here, and I want to ask as we wrap up, and I know you did this with Paul last year, if you could play some music for us, and after you do that, we want you to come back at some point and tell us your adventures at COP and what you're doing and where you are, because you're doing some of the most important work on the planet, and you're doing it in the most spirited and positive way imaginable. So on behalf of Alex, on behalf of Paul, I want to thank everybody today for coming to another Climate Emergency Forum event. This is not our last event where we'll be interviewing people from COP. We have at least one more coming up, and perhaps more than that in the days ahead. So keep a lookout for it. And if you like this program, we'd appreciate it if you could like it, subscribe to our channel, go to our website, climateemergencyforum.org. And if you see that donate button, and we hope you will see it, we hope that you will consider giving us at least a modest amount of money so we can continue the work of a program that is one of the few, if any, that focuses just on the climate emergency. So with that, we look forward to seeing you next time. Alex, have a wonderful time. It sounds like you've already started having a wonderful time. And I think your good vibrations will emanate throughout the planet as people see this. So thanks, everybody. We appreciate it. We'll see you next time.
Amazing work, Alex. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, amazing pleasure of being interviewed by you too. Fantastic to do it with you guys. You're the best.
Okay.
Really.
Cheers.
Seriously.
Hey, and so, I was talking about that woman from Colombia who was telling me, Alex, we want you to sing this song about something about Amazon and international law. So I just decided to take this melody I already had. Amazonia, Amazonia, we need laws to protect it and to keep it free. Amazonia, Amazonia, it's the most important land, it's our priority. And don't forget the biodiversity. It's a place for incredible creatures, it's a land with ecological features. So let's stop the forces that destroy it. International law works when we deploy it. Amazonia. Yeah, but then I'm gonna go right into Africa will be the leader. Africa will be the leader. Africa will be the leader in the climate solution today. The restoration of the plankton is the key. This person's bringing back the fish. And then the greenhouse gases have become much less because of the rising photosynthesis. Wow! Africa will be the leader. Africa will be the leader. Africa will be the leader, yeah, in the climate solution today. There's a climate solution today, and Africa's leading the way. Ocean pasture restoration, plankton restoration, Russ George vindication today.